Austin, Texas, September 2019. A young waitress walked out of a bar after her late-night shift. She was 22 years old. Her name was Jessica Flores. She was a single mother, raising a 2-year-old daughter while working nights to keep food on the table. At 2 a.m., Jessica left the bar. A witness claimed she got into a car with a man. After that, she was gone. She never came home. Her phone went dark. Her bank account froze. Her daughter woke up the next morning without a mother. 3 days later, a gray pickup truck was found abandoned on the side of a highway. It belonged to a man who had been seen with Jessica that night. Inside, investigators found fingerprints, but no blood, no signs of a struggle, nothing to explain what had happened. The case sent shockwaves through Austin. Jessica's mother stood outside the bar, begging for answers. She wouldn't leave her daughter, she said. The community launched search efforts. Posters covered streetlights. Volunteers combed fields. But Jessica had vanished into thin air. Very quickly, suspicion turned to the two men closest to her life. Her boyfriend, an unemployed violent alcoholic who had been seen fighting with her just days earlier. And another man, an older customer from the bar, rumored to be her secret lover. The last person seen with her before she disappeared. Was Jessica kidnapped? Did she run away from the chaos in her life? Or was she silenced by someone who claimed to care about her? This is the story of a missing waitress whose final night revealed a dangerous triangle of jealousy, violence, and secrets. Jessica Flores grew up in East Austin, Texas, in a small working-class neighborhood where every family knew each other. Her father left when she was still a child, leaving her mother, Maria Flores, to raise her alone. Money was always tight. At 20, Jessica's life changed again. She discovered she was pregnant. The father was Carlos Ramirez, a man she had dated only briefly. Despite the uncertainty, Jessica decided to keep the baby. In 2017, she gave birth to her daughter, Sophia. The relationship with Carlos unraveled almost immediately. Carlos was 25, unemployed, and already struggling with heavy drinking. Those closest to Jessica said he had a violent temper. Arguments turned physical more than once. Jessica tried to end things, but every time she did, Carlos pulled her back, using their daughter as leverage. He threatened to fight for custody, to take Sophia away if she left him. Friends later admitted they suspected Jessica was hiding abuse. She rarely spoke about it openly, but small hints slipped through. Unexplained bruises, sudden anxiety when Carlos appeared, phone calls she didn't want to answer. Through it all, Sophia became Jessica's only real motivation to keep moving forward. The baby gave her a reason to work harder, even when her life felt suffocating. Jessica lived with her mother, Maria, in a modest single-story house on the east side of Austin. Maria became her strongest support system. She cared for Sophia when Jessica worked night shifts. Neighbors often saw Maria pushing a stroller to daycare early in the morning, just as Jessica returned home, exhausted from work. Maria encouraged her daughter to cut ties with Carlos, warning that his anger could lead to tragedy. But Jessica felt trapped. Carlos wasn't just an ex-boyfriend, he was Sophia's father, and that connection made him hard to escape. Maria's role in the household grew larger with time. She was not just a grandmother. She was the anchor, keeping the fragile family together. Later, when Jessica disappeared, it was Maria who sounded the alarm. She told police in her first call, "My daughter would never leave her baby." Never that single line became a... Jessica eventually found steady work at a bar in downtown Austin, a busy place known for live music and long nights. She worked evening shifts, sometimes until 2 or 3 in the morning. It wasn't easy, but the income was better than her earlier jobs, and she needed every dollar. Her appearance and friendly manner quickly made her one of the most recognizable staff members. Customers liked her. Some came back just to sit at her tables. But working in that environment also brought complications. Bars attract regulars, some harmless, some not. For Jessica, one regular in particular would later matter a great deal: Daniel Brooks. Daniel, 30 years old, ran a small retail shop nearby. He often came into the bar late and stayed until closing. Rumors spread quickly that he and Jessica were more than friends. Several co-workers claimed they saw them eating together after shifts. Daniel, they said, was attentive, even protective, but also jealous. Jessica found herself in a dangerous triangle. On one side, Carlos, volatile, controlling, and unwilling to let go. On the other side, Daniel, older, possessive, and increasingly insistent on exclusivity. The bar staff noticed her stress. One night, Carlos stormed into the bar and accused her of cheating. He shouted, causing a scene witnessed by multiple patrons. Security had to escort him out. Jessica confided afterward that she was afraid Carlos might actually hurt her. That wasn't the only tension. Daniel often lingered until closing time, waiting for her. Some co-workers thought it was sweet, others said it felt too much like control. Whatever the truth, both men were pulling her in opposite directions, and Jessica was caught in the middle. Carlos had a reputation around the neighborhood. By 25, he was already known for drinking heavily. Police records later revealed multiple calls about disturbances at his previous addresses, though none resulted in charges. With Jessica, he took his aggression further. Her relatives recalled him threatening to take Sophia away. He knew custody was her greatest fear. Just 1 week before Jessica vanished, Carlos arrived at the bar drunk. He confronted her in front of customers, shouting that she was unfaithful. His words weren't just insults. They were public threats. Everyone in that room saw the level of his anger. Jessica told friends afterward that she feared Carlos was becoming dangerous. Police would later list him as a prime suspect. But suspicion alone wasn't enough. Without hard evidence, Carlos remained free, his shadow looming over the investigation. Daniel Brooks seemed, at first glance, the opposite. He had a steady job, owned a business, and wasn't known for violence. But those who knew Jessica claimed Daniel had a jealous streak. He wanted her to spend time with him, and grew frustrated when she couldn't. Family members didn't trust him. Maria said Daniel felt too old, too secretive. Still, he became a regular part of Jessica's life. On the night she disappeared, witnesses saw Daniel with her as she left the bar. Hours later, his car turned up abandoned on the side of a highway. He denied involvement, insisting he had nothing to do with Jessica's disappearance. But he could not provide a solid alibi. That detail alone made him as suspicious as Carlos. Both men were now under a cloud of doubt. Jessica's personal struggles added more weight. She was working long nights, raising a child, and managing 2 complicated relationships. Friends noticed she was always tired. Some said she looked like she hadn't slept in days. She once confided that she wanted to leave Austin, to start over somewhere safe. But escape never happened. Between rent, daycare, food, and bills, she was already in debt. She owed money on credit cards, on medical expenses, even on utilities. The thought of leaving was just that, a thought. Responsibility held her in place. Daniel gave her attention and a sense of stability, but he also added pressure. Carlos gave her fear, but she couldn't sever ties because of Sophia. Jessica was being pulled in two directions at once. In the week before her disappearance, the tension reached a peak. Carlos showed up at the bar again, shouting and threatening. Staff noticed Jessica checking her phone constantly, almost as if she expected bad news at any moment. At home, Maria saw her daughter return in tears more than once. Jessica's words to a close friend that week would echo later. "I need to get out of this." The friend believed she meant leaving both men behind. But Jessica made no plans. She didn't gather money, didn't prepare documents, didn't pack. Police later confirmed she left behind her passport, personal IDs, and even small amounts of cash. There was no sign she intended to run. To investigators, these final warnings became crucial. They suggested Jessica wasn't just stressed. She was in real danger. Jessica's daily routine made her disappearance even more suspicious. Every night, she worked late. Every night she came home, where Maria and Sophia waited. There were no exceptions. Even when she stayed briefly with coworkers after a shift, she returned before sunrise. Maria later told detectives she never left her daughter overnight. Never. Jessica was dependable. She was on time for work. She was on time for home. Customers and staff alike remembered her punctuality. That consistency mattered when the night of September 14, 2019, broke the pattern. She finished her shift at 2 a.m. She was seen leaving the bar, nervous, glancing around. Witnesses placed Daniel at her side. Other accounts suggested Carlos was in the area as well, watching from a distance. Within hours, Jessica had vanished. The story of Jessica Flores is not just about a young mother trying to survive. It's about the weight of responsibility pressing down on someone who never had the chance to chase her dreams. It's about a life squeezed between two men, one violent, the other secretive, each with their own hold on her. Her disappearance wasn't the result of chance. It grew out of years of hardship, unhealthy relationships, and escalating tension. The signs were there. Carlos's threats, Daniel's jealousy, Jessica's growing fear. Each clue pointed toward the possibility of violence. On September 14th, those pressures collided. Jessica left the bar in the early hours, just as she always did. But this time she didn't make it home. The foundation of her life, her daughter, her mother, her routine, made one thing clear. Jessica Flores didn't choose to vanish. Something happened that night, something deliberate. And it marked the beginning of a mystery that would haunt her family, her community, and investigators for years. It was September 14th, 2019, a Saturday night that stretched into early Sunday morning in Austin, Texas. For most people, it was just another weekend of music, drinks, and late hours downtown. But for Jessica Flores, a 22-year-old waitress, it was the last night anyone would ever see her alive. At 2 a.m., Jessica's shift ended at the bar where she worked. The place was loud, crowded, and buzzing until the final minutes. Cameras inside caught her moving quickly, grabbing her bag and saying goodbye to coworkers. But those same coworkers noticed something different. Jessica kept checking her phone all night, her hands shaking slightly. She wasn't relaxed. She wasn't laughing like she usually did. She was tense. The surveillance camera at the front door recorded her leaving. The image was blurry, grainy, with too much shadow to pick out clear details. Still, it showed her stepping out into the night, the sound of the city fading as the doors closed behind her. Inside, one man lingered, Daniel Brooks. 30 years old, a small business owner, and a regular at the bar. He had been drinking there all evening, staying until the very end. Staff said he often waited for Jessica, sometimes until closing. That night was no different. Around the same time, witnesses claimed they saw another figure near the bar. Carlos Ramirez, 25 years old, Jessica's ex, the father of her child, and a man known for drinking and violence. Several people thought they saw him outside, pacing, maybe watching. But the security cameras never confirmed it. If Carlos was there, he stayed just out of view. By 2:05 a.m., Jessica was walking toward the parking lot. Emily Sanchez, a co-worker and friend, would later tell police she saw Jessica head to the lot with Daniel beside her. Emily remembered Jessica looked nervous, her eyes darting as if she expected trouble. She was carrying her purse, but nothing else. Jessica's routine was predictable. She worked late shifts. She always returned home by 3. Maria, her mother, stayed awake to watch Sophia, Jessica's 2-year-old daughter. Every night, Maria expected the sound of keys at the door. Jessica stepping inside, exhausted but safe. That routine never broke. Until that night. At 2:15 a.m., Jessica's phone went dark. No more texts, no more calls, no pings on cell towers. It was like the device had been switched off or destroyed. There were no withdrawals from her bank account, no credit card use, no trace of activity on social media. She didn't send a single message to friends. She simply vanished. By 2:30 a.m., Maria noticed something was wrong. The hours passed slowly. By 4 a.m., panic set in. She called Jessica's phone again and again, straight to voicemail. She waited, hoping for the sound of the door opening, but nothing came. At 7 a.m., Maria began calling Jessica's friends. Nobody had seen her since she left the bar. Nobody had heard from her. By 9 a.m., Maria dialed 911. Her words were clear and urgent. Her daughter never came home, and this was not normal. Police treated it seriously from the start, because Jessica had left behind her daughter, something everyone agreed she would never do willingly. 3 days later, the search took a turn. Along Interstate 35, about 25 miles north of Austin, a gray pickup truck was spotted abandoned on the side of the road. It was registered to Daniel Brooks. Inside, investigators found fingerprints belonging to Jessica. But that didn't mean much. She had been in the truck before. What mattered more was what they didn't find. No blood, no hair, no torn clothing, no signs of a struggle. The interior looked clean. When detectives sat down with Carlos Ramirez, his story was shaky. He said he spent that night drinking at a friend's house, too drunk to leave. But the friend never confirmed it. On his hands were scratches, small but visible. He claimed they came from falling off his bike earlier in the week. Investigators weren't convinced. Carlos's history with Jessica made him a prime suspect. He had threatened her before, even in public. Just a week earlier, he had stormed into the bar shouting that she was cheating, causing such a scene that staff had to step in. Everyone remembered it. Everyone knew he had the temper. But suspicion wasn't enough. Without proof, police couldn't hold him. Daniel Brooks told a different story. He admitted he left the bar with Jessica that night. He said she asked him for a ride and he drove her a short distance before she wanted to get out. He claimed he dropped her off and then went home. When asked where exactly he dropped her, Daniel hesitated. His answer changed more than once. He couldn't provide a single witness who saw her after he did. His alibi was weak. And then there was his truck, found abandoned on the highway, raising even more suspicion. Why would he leave his vehicle like that? Why did his phone, like Jessica's, go silent around the same time? Investigators pressed him, but again, there was no direct evidence. Without it, Daniel was left to walk free. For police, the early investigation was already collapsing into dead ends. The cameras outside the bar had been useless, too dark, too grainy, no clear license plates, no way to confirm who else might have been in the parking lot. The last ping from Jessica's phone came just minutes after she left the bar. After that, silence. Her bank accounts froze in time, no new transactions. Her social media went cold. It was as if she had been erased. Detectives considered every possibility. Had she run away? Number. She left her daughter. In the days after Jessica disappeared, Austin erupted with rumors. Some swore Carlos had killed her. Others were convinced Daniel had snapped. Flyers went up across the city. Volunteers searched parks, rivers, and wooded areas. Every tip was followed. None led to Jessica. The local press gave the case a name: The Missing Waitress. It was a simple title, but it captured the reality. A young woman, working late nights to support her child, had vanished into thin air. Her family refused to believe she had left by choice. Maria told reporters through tears, "My daughter would never leave her baby." The image of her 2-year-old granddaughter waiting at home only deepened the heartbreak. Friends added more context. Jessica had been planning to leave her job at the bar. She wanted to start fresh. She wanted out of the cycle of Carlos's abuse and Daniel's possessiveness. But she never got the chance. The official investigation struggled from the start. Carlos and Daniel were questioned repeatedly, but neither man cracked. Both denied any role in Jessica's disappearance. Both refused to admit guilt. And without physical evidence, police couldn't charge them. 3 days turned into 3 weeks. 3 weeks turned into 3 months. Every lead went nowhere. The truck gave no answers. The phone never reappeared. The witnesses contradicted each other. The timeline was solid until 2:10 a.m., then it fell into a void. The case became a tangle of suspicion without resolution. For Jessica's family, those first nights were the hardest. Maria stayed awake, staring at the door, still hoping her daughter would walk through. Each hour that passed only confirmed the reality. Jessica wasn't coming home. Detective Aaron Mitchell, leading the case, summarized the frustration. "We had 2 strong suspects, 2 strong motives, and nothing we could take to court." It was one of the most publicized investigations in Austin that year, but publicity didn't bring evidence. The disappearance of Jessica Flores quickly became a symbol of something larger. A case with 2 obvious suspects and no clear answers. A case where the victim's routine, her family ties, her very predictability, made her vanishing even more disturbing. Because people don't just vanish at 2 a.m. after work. Not without help. Not without someone making it happen. And so, September 14th, 2019, marked the beginning of a mystery still unsolved. Jessica Flores left her shift, stepped into the night, and never returned. Between 2 and 3 a.m., somewhere along the streets of Austin, something happened that erased her from the world. The last to see her alive were 2 men, one violent, one secretive, both with reasons to hold on to her, both with reasons to silence her. The story of Jessica's disappearance is not just about that night. It is about the questions that followed, the trails that went cold, and the investigation that struggled to find truth in the shadows. From the moment she walked into that parking lot, Jessica's fate was sealed. What happened between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. remains one of Austin's most enduring mysteries. If you found Jessica's story as unsettling as we did, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with others so more people can follow the case. Leave a comment below with your thoughts. Who do you think was responsible that night? Carlos or Daniel? In the next part, we'll go deeper into... By 9 a.m. on September 15, 2019, Maria Flores could no longer hold on to hope. Her daughter had not come home after her night shift. Jessica's phone was dead, her purse untouched, and most importantly, her 2-year-old daughter was still asleep in her crib, waiting for a mother who never returned. Maria dialed 911. Her voice was steady but urgent. She told officers that Jessica had vanished, leaving her child behind. That single fact changed everything. Police understood immediately this was not a typical disappearance. This was not a young woman choosing to escape her problems. A mother does not abandon her 2-year-old without a word. The Austin Police Department classified the case as high risk from the very beginning. Detective Aaron Mitchell, a veteran officer known for handling missing persons, was assigned as lead investigator. He arrived at Maria's modest home that morning, notebook in hand, ready to begin the first hours of what would become one of the city's most troubling mysteries. The first stage of the search focused on Jessica's last known location, the bar where she worked late into the night. Officers canvassed the parking lot, searching for discarded items, clothing, or signs of a struggle. Nothing turned up. The ground was clear. They brought in dogs trained to track scent. Handlers used items from Jessica's home to guide them. The dogs picked up a faint trail from the back door of the bar to the lot, the same path captured by surveillance cameras. But once the trail reached the edge of the street, it was lost. It was as though Jessica had been lifted away, leaving no path forward. Investigators turned to technology. They pulled video from nearby traffic cameras, hoping to catch a glimpse of Jessica's movements after she left the bar. The results were disappointing. The footage was blurry, marred by poor lighting. They could see headlights leaving the area, but no clear license plates, no identifiable faces. Every vehicle looked the same in the grainy images. 3 days later, a break seemed to come. A driver called in to report an abandoned vehicle along Interstate 35, about 25 miles north of Austin. It was a gray pickup truck parked awkwardly on the shoulder. The plates traced back to Daniel Brooks, the man last seen with Jessica. Officers secured the vehicle and examined the interior. Inside, they found fingerprints belonging to Jessica Flores. At first glance, this seemed critical, proof she had been in the truck on the night she disappeared. But the detail quickly lost weight. Jessica had been in Daniel's vehicle before. Friends and co-workers confirmed they had seen her ride with him on other nights. The prints proved contact, but not crime. More importantly, the truck showed no signs of violence. No blood, no torn fabric, no hair, no defensive marks. Nothing that suggested Jessica had been attacked inside. It was as if she had simply ridden in the truck, then left. Detectives were left with a troubling possibility. Was Daniel telling the truth when he said he dropped her off? Or had the truck been cleaned? The evidence inside was too neutral, too inconclusive. What looked at first like a lead was in fact another dead end. Attention then shifted to the 2 men at the center of Jessica's life. Carlos Ramirez, her ex-boyfriend and the father of her child, had a long history of drinking and violence. Neighbors knew him for his temper. Jessica's friends had seen bruises. A week before she vanished, he had stormed into the bar shouting accusations of infidelity. Everyone saw how enraged he was. When police questioned him, Carlos claimed he had been drinking at a friend's house the night of September 14th. Too drunk to leave, he said. But the alibi crumbled immediately. The friend refused to back him up. No one could place him at that location. Detectives also noticed scratches on his hands. When asked, Carlos shrugged and said he had fallen off his bike earlier in the week. The explanation sounded flimsy, but without proof it was only. Witnesses were interviewed again and again. Emily Sanchez, Jessica's co-worker and friend, told police what she saw that night. Jessica leaving the bar, looking nervous, with Daniel at her side. Emily was firm in her memory. Another patron remembered something darker. A shadowy figure near the parking lot, standing still, watching. He thought it might have been Carlos, but he couldn't be sure. The description was too vague to hold up in court. It was an impression, not proof. Back at home, Maria's neighbors described Jessica as reliable. She always returned after work. She never stayed out overnight. Their statements supported what Maria had told investigators from the start. Jessica would not have left willingly. Forensic science offered no breakthroughs. Jessica's phone was gone, presumed destroyed. No pings, no recovery. Her financial accounts were frozen in time, untouched. Her social media showed no sign of activity. Police dogs attempted to track her scent from the bar to the parking lot, then to the road beyond. But the trail cut off sharply, likely masked by heavy traffic. The dogs couldn't go further. The absence of physical evidence became the loudest part of the case. No body, no weapon, no DNA. Just silence. By the fourth day, the case had exploded into the public eye. Local media gave it a name, the missing waitress. Headlines ran across Texas. Television crews gathered outside Maria's home. The story had everything. A young mother, a sudden disappearance, 2 suspicious men, and no answers. Maria appeared on camera, tears running down her face, clutching her granddaughter. Her words were simple. "My daughter would never leave her baby." Never. That statement spread everywhere. It became the emotional centerpiece of the case. Community pressure mounted. Volunteers printed flyers with Jessica's picture and handed them out downtown. Posters were stapled. By the end of September, the investigation had stalled. Carlos was suspicious but not provably guilty. Daniel was suspicious but equally protected by lack of evidence. Detective Aaron Mitchell summarized the frustration in one of his few public statements. "We have 2 strong suspects and no direct evidence against either one. This is a case built on shadows." The case files were thick with interviews, timelines, and inconclusive forensics, yet none of it could move the case forward. The early investigation had started with urgency. The family reported Jessica missing within hours. Police responded with search teams, dogs, and technology. They found a truck. They questioned suspects. They gathered witnesses. But step by step, every lead fell apart. The truck was too clean. The witnesses were uncertain. The suspects lied, but lies were not enough. Evidence didn't materialize. What should have been the strongest hours of the case, the first days after a disappearance, turned into a frustrating standstill. As weeks passed, the community's patience wore thin. Families demanded answers. Journalists pushed police for updates. And the story of Jessica Flores grew darker with every day she remained missing. From the moment Maria called police that Sunday morning, investigators had known this was no ordinary case. But by the end of the early investigation, All they had were two men with reasons to harm her, and nothing that tied either to her disappearance. The question now shifted. If police couldn't solve the case, could the community? Could the public theories, the suspicions, the whispers about Carlos and Daniel bring new light? And that is where the story turned next. As the days turned into weeks, the investigation into Jessica Flores' disappearance narrowed. The spotlight fell on two men. Both were close to Jessica, both had histories with her, and both had reasons to be investigated. On one side stood Carlos Ramirez, her former boyfriend and the father of her child. 25 years old, unemployed, and well known in the neighborhood for his temper. On the other side stood Daniel Brooks, 30 years old, a small business owner, and the last man confirmed to have been with Jessica on the night she vanished. To the police, to the media, and to the public, these two names became inseparable from the case. Everyone wanted to know which of them carried the truth, and which of them carried guilt. Carlos Ramirez had long been a storm in Jessica's life. Their relationship had ended, but because they shared a daughter, contact never completely stopped. Carlos used that connection to maintain control. A week before Jessica went missing, he had shown up at her workplace. Witnesses recalled the shouting. Carlos accused Jessica of cheating. His voice carried across the room, his anger so sharp that staff had to intervene. It was an ugly scene, one that left Jessica shaken. That outburst gave investigators a possible motive: jealousy. If Carlos could erupt in rage in front of a crowd, what might he do in private? Then there were the details from the night of her disappearance. When detectives questioned Carlos, they noticed scratches on his hands. He explained them away, saying he had fallen from his bike. To police, the excuse felt thin. Scratches can come from many places: an accident or a struggle. Neighbors added fuel to suspicion. Several reported hearing shouting from Jessica's home just days before she vanished. Arguments that sounded heated, angry, and personal. The kind of arguments that pointed back to Carlos. And then there was his alibi. Carlos told detectives he had been drinking, but Daniel Brooks was no less suspicious. Daniel had been part of Jessica's life in a different way. He was not the father of her child. He was not part of her daily struggles at home. Instead, he appeared in her life through the bar where she worked. A customer at first, then something more. Co-workers said Daniel often stayed until closing, waiting for Jessica to finish. They sometimes left together. People whispered about a secret relationship. Jessica never confirmed it, but the rumors grew. On the night she disappeared, Daniel was there again. He drank until the bar closed. He left with Jessica. Multiple witnesses saw them walk together into the parking lot. Security cameras caught their shadows moving toward his truck. That placed him as the last known person with Jessica. And in investigations, the last person often matters most. 3 days later, police found his gray pickup truck abandoned on Interstate 35, 25 miles north of the city. Inside were Jessica's fingerprints. That discovery tied her to the truck, but not to a crime. Friends knew she had been in the vehicle before. Still, questions grew louder. Why was his truck abandoned? Why was it sitting on the side of a highway? Daniel could not provide a clear answer. His explanations shifted. None made sense. When questioned about Jessica, Daniel admitted giving her a ride. He claimed she asked him to drop her off somewhere, and he did. But when pressed for details, he stumbled. His story changed. Sometimes he said he left her near downtown. Other times he suggested a different spot. Investigators noticed the contradictions. Then came another critical detail. Phone records showed that Daniel's phone, like Jessica's, went dark around 2:15 a.m. The timing was exact. Both devices stopped transmitting signals at nearly the same moment. That coincidence was hard to ignore. Jessica's co-workers added more concerns. They described Daniel as controlling, jealous, a man who didn't like when Jessica gave attention. The community began to split. One group was convinced Carlos was guilty. They pointed to his history of abuse, his angry outburst at the bar, and the scratches on his hand. To them, he was the violent boyfriend who finally snapped. Another group believed Daniel was the true suspect. They argued he had more opportunity. He was with Jessica at the moment she disappeared. His abandoned truck, his shifting alibis, and his silence after the fact made him look guilty. And then there was a third theory, whispered but persistent. Some wondered if Jessica had run away. Maybe she wanted to escape both Carlos and Daniel. Maybe she planned to disappear and start fresh. But Maria and those closest to Jessica pushed back hard. She left behind her daughter. She left behind her money, her identification, and her phone. She had no bags, no plan. Maria repeated the same line. My daughter would never leave her baby. To her family, and to most of the public, the runaway theory was insulting. They believed firmly that Jessica had been taken against her will. The media cooled her gasoline on the fire. Local papers ran headlines painting Carlos as the violent ex-boyfriend. They described his outbursts, his drinking, his history with Jessica. Articles leaned heavily into the image of a jealous man losing control. But television programs sometimes focused on Daniel instead. They emphasized that he was the last person to see Jessica alive. They replayed interviews with co-workers who described her unease around him. They highlighted the abandoned truck on I-35, a mystery in itself. On social media, arguments raged. Was it Carlos? Was it Daniel? Threads debated every detail. Some pointed to the scratches on Carlos. Others dissected Daniel's inconsistent timeline. Every photo of Jessica, every interview with her mother, every rumor became part of the public trial. Inside the Austin Police Department, Detective Aaron Mitchell faced the same problem. Two men, two possible suspects. Both looked guilty in their own way, but neither could be charged. Carlos had no confirmed alibi. His violent history weighed heavily. Yet no physical evidence tied him to Jessica's disappearance. No blood, no DNA, no witnesses who saw him with her that night. Daniel had been the last man with her. His truck was found abandoned. His story was inconsistent. Yet again, there was no physical proof. Jessica's fingerprints in his vehicle meant nothing. She had been there before. His silence and contradictions made him suspicious, but not prosecutable. Mitchell described the situation as a case built on suspicion, not evidence. He knew the community wanted an arrest. He knew Maria wanted justice. But law required proof, and proof was nowhere to be found. The early investigation that had begun with urgency was now stuck in a cycle of theories. Detectives couldn't move forward, so speculation took over. By the end of the first month, the Jessica Flores case was no longer just an investigation. It had become a battle of suspicions. Carlos versus Daniel, violent ex-boyfriend versus secret lover. Two men, two possible stories, and one missing woman. The police remained trapped in the middle. Each theory looked strong from one angle, weak from another. Each had motive, each had opportunity, and each lacked evidence. Theories began to bleed into community life. Families argued, neighbors speculated. The case divided Austin into camps of belief. And as it did, it set the stage for the next chapter. How Jessica's family, her friends, and the larger community would respond to a mystery that refused to be solved. From the beginning, Jessica's family never accepted the idea that she walked away by choice. Her mother, Maria Flores, repeated the same words in every interview. "My daughter would never leave her baby." To her, to Jessica's friends, and to most of the Austin community, that was the truth. Jessica's love for her daughter, Sophia, was unshakable. That made her disappearance not just a mystery, but a crime in their eyes. Maria appeared in front of cameras again and again. Each time she carried the same message. Jessica was missing, and she needed to be found. At candlelight vigils organized outside their East Austin home, Maria held her granddaughter and pleaded with the public. She asked for help, for information, for answers. Neighbors and strangers came with candles, flowers, and prayers. The family's stand turned Jessica's case into more than a police file. It became a human story that the entire community could see. Jessica's friends supported that message with their own stories. Some remembered her talking about wanting a new job. She was tired of the late-night shifts, tired of the endless hours at the bar. She wanted a safer, steadier life, one where she could raise her daughter without fear. Others recalled the tension she carried whenever Carlos Ramirez appeared. He was her ex-boyfriend, the father of her child, and someone who had already hurt her more than once. Jessica confided that she was scared of him, that his temper was unpredictable, that his anger always returned no matter how much she tried to cut ties. But Daniel Brooks was not free of blame either. Friends said Jessica often argued with him. Some described their relationship as complicated and tense. She sometimes spoke about wanting to distance herself from him as well. The testimony showed that Jessica was caught between two men. Both brought her trouble. Both gave her. As word of the disappearance spread, Austin residents began to take action. Flyers with Jessica's face appeared on telephone poles, in shop windows, and on street corners. Volunteers walked the neighborhoods, handing out posters and asking questions. They drove through nearby towns, taping Jessica's photo on bulletin boards and gas station doors. Community groups organized search efforts. Teams of residents combed local parks, riverbanks, and wooded areas. They carried flashlights, sticks, and bags, hoping to find any trace of Jessica. Others searched along highways, checking ditches and rest stops. In the first week, hundreds of people joined the effort. The searches stretched for miles, but they turned up nothing. No clothing, no phone, no body. What the searches did find was solidarity. The community united behind Jessica's family. Even without answers, people wanted to show that they cared. But as the searches continued, rumors began to spread. Some whispered that Carlos had killed Jessica in a jealous rage. They pointed to his violent history, to his outbursts, to the scratches on his hands. In their minds, he was guilty, even if the police couldn't prove it. Others believed Daniel was responsible. He was the last person seen with Jessica. His truck was found abandoned. His story about dropping her off never made sense. His phone went dark the same time hers did. To many, that made him the obvious suspect. And then there were those who suggested Jessica had run away. They claimed she wanted to escape both men, to start over in secret. But her family and closest friends rejected that idea. Jessica left her daughter behind. She left her identification, her money, her belongings. She had no plan, no destination, no resources. Running away wasn't just unlikely, it was impossible. These competing rumors divided the community. Arguments flared on social media. Neighbors debated in grocery stores and at church. The media added more fuel. Local television stations aired nightly segments about the case. Reporters stood outside the Flores home, outside the bar where Jessica worked, and along the stretch of Interstate 35 where Daniel's truck was found. They told the story again and again, each time with new voices, new interviews, new speculation. Newspapers published articles highlighting different angles. Some focused on Carlos, painting him as the violent ex-boyfriend who couldn't let go. Others zeroed in on Daniel, the secret lover who might have hidden a darker side. Radio shows opened their phone lines to callers, who offered opinions and rumors of their own. Social media filled with hashtags demanding answers. The story spread beyond Austin, drawing regional and even national coverage. For Maria, the attention was painful but necessary. She knew that keeping Jessica's name alive in the media meant keeping pressure on the police. And the police were feeling that pressure. Detective Aaron Mitchell spoke at press briefings, standing behind podiums flanked by other officers. He gave updates when he could, but they were thin. The department set up a hotline for tips. In the first month, more than 200 calls came in. Each was logged and investigated. Some were obvious hoaxes. Some were cases of mistaken identity. Others sounded promising but fell apart under review. One caller claimed to have seen Jessica at a truck stop. Security cameras proved it wasn't her. Another said she overheard men bragging about hurting a young woman. The story collapsed when details didn't match. Each lead raised hopes and then dashed them again. Mitchell was candid with the media. "We have many accounts, but we don't have evidence that can move this case forward." His words frustrating Jessica's family and the community. They wanted action. They wanted an arrest. Instead, they got statements about uncertainty. As weeks passed, confidence in the investigation. Through it all, one image came to define the case. Maria holding little Sophia, standing before cameras, begging for answers. The toddler in her arms, the grief on her face. Those scenes were replayed across Texas. They were published in newspapers and shared online thousands of times. The sight of a grandmother raising a child who no longer had her mother cut through the debates about suspects. It reminded people that behind the theories and rumors, there was a real family left in pain. The community felt the injustice deeply. How could a young woman disappear from a busy part of the city, surrounded by people, and leave behind no trace? How could there be no arrests, no progress, no answers? Each vigil, each prayer service carried both sorrow and anger. In the months that followed, Jessica's name continued to appear in headlines, but the leads didn't improve. Vigils were held every few weeks. Posters were refreshed with brighter ink and new phone numbers. Volunteers still searched fields and riverbanks, but nothing changed. No new evidence surfaced, no new witnesses stepped forward. Police still couldn't connect either Carlos or Daniel to a crime. Both men remained free. Both remained under suspicion. For Maria, for Jessica's friends, and for the entire Austin community, hope was slipping. What had begun as a united effort to find Jessica was now turning into a test of endurance. The community's patience was running out. Part 6 of the story ends not with answers, but with frustration. The family stood strong, insisting Jessica had not left by choice. Friends added their voices, showing her fear of both men. The community mobilized, searching and praying. Rumors spread, dividing neighbors and strangers alike. The media amplified every angle, every theory. Police set up hotlines and chased tips, but found nothing. And through it all, the emotional toll grew heavier. By late September, 2 weeks after Jessica Flores vanished, the investigation was already showing cracks. Leads that once seemed promising slipped away. Tips came in, but led nowhere. The community kept searching, but every effort ended in disappointment. The first sign of trouble was the surveillance. Detectives had pulled hours of traffic camera footage from downtown Austin. They wanted to track Jessica and Daniel's movements after they left the bar. But the footage gave them nothing clear. The cameras were too far away, the lighting too poor. A truck that looked like Daniel's appeared on one angle, but the plate number was unreadable. Another clip showed a dark vehicle heading north, but again, no detail sharp enough to confirm. Investigators admitted they had lost the trail at the very moment it mattered most. That was the first dead end. The second came from Jessica's phone. Records showed it stopped transmitting at exactly 2:15 a.m., just minutes after she walked out of the bar. From that moment forward, there was nothing. No pings, no location updates, no calls or texts. The phone was gone. Police considered the possibilities. Someone could have switched it off. It could have been destroyed. Either way, the silence was final. For investigators, phones are often lifelines in missing person cases. They track movement, reveal patterns, and show the truth. But Jessica's phone gave them nothing. It was as if it had been erased from the night. That was the second dead end. Detectives turned next to her financial records. If Jessica had decided to disappear, she would need money. She would need to move it, spend it, or at least use it to travel. But her accounts were frozen in time. No bank withdrawals, no credit card charges, no online transfers. Her digital footprint was just as still. Jessica was active on social media. She posted, she messaged, she scrolled. Rumors filled the void. In Austin, people began to whisper that Jessica had left on her own, that she had gone away with another man, that she had planned a secret escape. Police checked these claims, but none held up. Jessica had no passport, she had no money. She left behind her child. The theory collapsed under simple facts. Maria Flores dismissed it as nonsense. "My daughter didn't leave. Someone took her," she told reporters. But the rumors still hurt. They distracted the public, weakened the search, and created divisions in the community. For Jessica's family, the escape theory was just another cruel twist in a case already filled with pain. By October, Detective Aaron Mitchell faced the press. Standing at the podium, he gave the words no one wanted to hear. "We do not have legal evidence to arrest either suspect. Carlos and Daniel remained free." Each man carried suspicion, but suspicion was not enough. There was no DNA, no witness testimony strong enough for charges, no confession. The case could not move forward. Within weeks, the department reclassified it. What had been handled as a possible homicide became a missing person file. The focus shifted from solving a crime to waiting for new information. For Jessica's family, the announcement was crushing. Maria Flores continued to attend vigils, but now her pleas were mixed with despair. She stood before candles and posters holding her granddaughter, crying as she admitted she felt abandoned. The system that was supposed to find her daughter had given up. Jessica's siblings echoed the same frustration. They believed the police had failed. They believed both Carlos and Daniel were guilty in some way, yet neither faced consequences. As weeks turned into months, the family's trust eroded. They no longer believed the investigation would bring answers. Their hope rested only on chance, on a body being found or a witness stepping forward. The community, once united,
Surveillance failed. Her phone went dark. Her bank account and social media froze. Forensics gave nothing. Rumors offered lies. Police admitted they had no case. The family's trust broke. The community's faith dissolved. Every path that investigators followed ended in the same place. Nowhere. Jessica Flores was gone. And with no evidence, no body, and no answers, the case stalled. Months later, her name remained, but her story had no progress. The stage was set for Part 8, Aftermath and Reflection. A chapter not about the investigation itself, but about what happens when a family, a city, and two suspects are left living in the shadow of a mystery that refuses to be solved. Years passed, but Jessica Flores never returned. The young mother who walked out of a bar in Austin one September night was still missing. No body, no confession, no arrest. Just silence. Her daughter Sophia grew up in her grandmother's home, raised by Maria Flores. The little girl who once waited for her mother to come home from a night shift was now a teenager. But she had no memory of her mother beyond photographs and the stories told by family. For Maria, each year was marked by grief. She organized vigils, lit candles, and reminded the public that Jessica's case was not closed. Every anniversary brought the same message. Jessica had not walked away. Someone had taken her. Carlos Ramirez lived under suspicion. He was never charged with a crime, but the shadow of the case followed him. Neighbors remembered the fights, the yelling, the police calls. When Jessica vanished, many believed he was responsible. Even after the case stalled, that belief never left. Carlos denied involvement, but his words carried little weight. Jobs were hard to keep. Relationships collapsed under whispers. He was marked by the community as the violent ex-boyfriend who might have killed the mother of his child. The Austin Police Department continued to receive tips, though fewer with each passing year. A reported sighting at a bus station, a rumor of a body in a rural field, a claim from an inmate who said he overheard a confession. Each tip was checked. Each tip failed. Detective Aaron Mitchell admitted the case haunted him. He had chased every lead, questioned every witness, and reviewed every scrap of evidence. But without physical proof, without a body, he had nothing to present in court. "We can't arrest on suspicion alone," he told reporters years later. His honesty was painful, but it was the truth. The case had slipped into the category of unsolved mysteries. The media never let Jessica's story fully die. Local stations revisited the case on anniversaries. National true crime shows featured it in segments. Podcasts dissected the evidence, debating whether Carlos or Daniel was the more likely killer. Some hosts pointed to Carlos, the violent history, the jealousy, the lack of alibi. Others highlighted Daniel, the last sighting, the abandoned truck, the phone records. The division mirrored the original investigation. 2 men, 2 possible answers, 0 proof. The speculation kept the case alive,
but it also fueled frustration. For Jessica's family, the constant debate was a reminder of what they didn't have: closure. Sophia, Jessica's daughter, grew into her teenage years under this cloud. For her, the mother she lost was more myth than memory. She lived with questions that had no answers. Why did her mother disappear? Who was responsible? Why had no one been punished? Maria Flores shielded her granddaughter as best she could. She tried to provide normalcy. But Sophia's childhood was shaped by vigils, news cameras, and whispers from classmates who knew her mother's face from missing posters. Each year, the family hosted a candlelight vigil in Austin. Friends, neighbors, and community members gathered, holding photos of Jessica, praying for answers. Some years the crowd was large, other years it was small, but the family kept going. Maria often said the same words: "I will not stop until I know what happened." The vigils became less about finding Jessica alive and more about keeping her story from fading into silence. Law enforcement occasionally reopened parts of the case. Advances in technology gave them new tools. DNA testing improved. Phone data recovery grew more advanced. Detectives revisited the truck, the home searches, the fingerprints. But each time, the result was the same: no breakthrough. In interviews, Aaron Mitchell admitted frustration. "It feels like she vanished into thin air," he said. "But I know that's not true. Something happened that night. We just don't have the evidence to prove what." For the Austin community, the case became a symbol. It represented not just a missing woman, but the limits of the justice system. Everyone believed someone was guilty, but no one could prove it. The frustration lingered long after the searches ended. True crime programs highlighted Jessica's disappearance as one of the city's most haunting, unsolved cases. Her photo appeared on missing lists alongside other victims whose stories ended without answers. The years changed the story from an active investigation into a cold case. The passion of the early days, hundreds of volunteers, search parties, posters across the city, faded into routine. Jessica's face became familiar but distant, another name in a long line of mysteries. But for her family, the pain never dulled. For them, every year was the same as the first. No closure. No justice. What remained was the question that had hung over the case since the beginning. Was Jessica Flores the victim of a violent crime, or did she choose to disappear? The evidence pointed one way. She had no money, no plan, no passport. She left her daughter behind. Those facts made the escape theory nearly impossible. But without a body, without proof, the question never fully went away. Carlos and Daniel carried suspicion for the rest of their lives. The community remained divided over which man was more dangerous. But neither